Well, hello everyone. I know I got a couple emails from people who had just family and work engagements pop up, but we're gonna go ahead and get it started. So thank you for everyone for taking a very hot night and spend it with me. I guess we all rather be in air conditioning on a night like tonight anyway. So I have the agenda up, but I think you guys can tell by last time I like to keep this loose and conversational. So I will just start off going over a couple things and then we'll dive right into discussion. And what would a Zoom be without a PowerPoint? It's really not necessary, but I have to have a PowerPoint. So same thing as normal. Everyone be nice to each other. These are our small groups. Today is the second small group of the week and of the night for me and for our overall working group. I have summary pages for all the different groups. I'll pop over to that for us to review. But before I do that, I just wanted, one of the questions I know I've gotten, I think in almost every single group is the legislature actually going to do anything? Do they care? Are they looking at education funding? And I just wanted to give you guys a quick update that although it's in the interim, I know some of you may be paying a lot of attention and some of you may not be paying as much of attention. So just quick overview of what's been happening. So last week, a couple different things happened. There was a constitutional players convening about education. So they brought together the governor's office, OPI, the Board of Public Education, the Education Committee, Education Budget Committee, had a big just basically discussion to talk about ideas. And a lot of the things that we're talking about in our group are things they're talking about up there. So that's a great sign. And also we talked about our group up there too. We made sure give a quick update to them that we're just chugging along. And then they also had the interim committee hearings. So they had an education and a budget education budget interim committee hearings. A lot of things we're talking about, they talked about. And then Ledge Days was last week too. So besides the normal like legislators that are in education policy all the time, they brought together all the legislators last week. And they had like little breakout sessions about different policy areas. Two of the breakout sessions were about school funding. And then they're also doing previews of going into the study of school funding. So it is a topic that is on everyone's mind up at the legislature. So, they're paying attention to what everyone's talking about. So rest assured, we don't know what they'll do yet, but they are interested. They're paying attention. They're talking about it. So bear with me while I bring up. Actually, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint to follow the link here. So this is the little summary page of some of the areas we discussed last week. So this is, you should have all gotten an email. It's up on our website. It's so it's accessible. If you guys want to take a quick look at it now, while you guys take a quick glance at that, I will talk because I know it's not that great to read this on your computer screens. And I know there was a number of questions last time, and I did my best to try to throw links into the shared drive that helped answer those questions. But I did just want to go over a couple of things. I know health insurance was a big topic, and we started to talk about what could we do to help with teachers' health insurance costs. And we did talk about how the legislature passed a bill, and there's really no update at this point because it hasn't been fully implemented. But I did want to give some people some stats on it. So $40 million of the surplus was used to basically create a trust fund to provide a minimum of 150 school districts with a collective pool of 12,000 employees to participate to like start this off with. So basically we don't have any feedback or anything to go off of how this will start to improve the health insurance or if it won't, but that is something at play. So I just wanted to update on that. We talked about Iowa creating a base pay. There's a link to an article in there. Basically, Iowa created a statewide base pay of $50,000. So there's an article in the share drive. I don't want to go over too much of this because I want us to get into discussion, but I did want to bring up a couple of stats. another question was how many like unfilled vacancies are at this moment. And right now there's I would say a peak or a higher level of vacancies. There's a little over 1,000 vacancies for in-classroom teachers. So that doesn't include like principals and like other paraprofessionals, stuff like that. But 10,862 classroom teachers are in the classroom. We have 1,000 openings, and there's 174 emergency authorizations from last year. I don't have this year's numbers completed just yet, but last year there was 174 through 2023. So I know that was a couple of the questions, and then we wanted to also know, I think, where some of the money has gone for the lottery. So let me bring up, there's in the share drive, there's a couple articles about this. So I think people had questions of where the lottery money is going. So that is in there. So people can take a closer look at this if they would like, but there's also a breakdown of like where the marijuana money is going and everything like that. But this is a historical distribution of where the lottery money was originally going. It was originally going towards teacher retirement obligations. And now we're at the point where if it hits a certain level, it does go to STEM scholarships. You can see it hit here and here, but it doesn't really go to education funding. But I don't want to belabor us with going over all the documents in there, but there is a number of, sorry, I know I'm bringing up lots of things, but if you go in here, there's a number of things on finance. I also put in Tennessee just redid their funding formula. I put a link to some of their information in there. And one other thing that I wanted to share with you guys, I know I'm talking a lot in the beginning, so bear with me. But I wanted to get some of these stats that you guys were interested in last time out of the way. Teacher. So last week, as part of the constitutional players meeting, in the budget, interim budget meeting, OPI prepared this document and pulled some stats, and I thought it was really interesting and apropos for our group in particular here. And I put that in the share drive so you guys can look at this closer too. But a couple of things that I thought I want to highlight was the factors that drive teacher turnover. Obviously, we talk about pay a lot and the cost of living, and it's a huge, huge burden. But the number one reason why teachers leave the teaching profession is poor working conditions. So I think we should talk a little bit about that today too, and of how we can possibly put together some positive ideas on that. But then of the teachers who left the workforce, 12.6 or 12.16 were special education teachers versus 9.89 of teachers with general education. So we can see that some of these specialized teachers leave earlier, and turnover is the worst in the first 5 years. So 30% of first-year teachers experience turnover, and 27% teachers with 2 to 5 year licensure leave. So I think that was really important to point out, because also if we look at the pay disparity between Montana and other states, the starting year teacher salary, there's a larger disparity where we have low, but then we can kind of come even actually, and we kind of start to be, we're not as much of an outlier going further on in their career. So really, I think we need to spend a lot of time talking about how we recruit and retain those earlier teachers. And again, talk about the cost of when you have a teacher leave, the cost of recruiting, bringing that teacher in, training them, and trying to keep them. It's actually very cost prohibitive to always be replacing teachers. So there's a lot of cool stats in there. Again, don't want to belabor this. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, Katie, but where is that document that you're sharing, the legislative? I see a 3-point something as the file name, and I'm not seeing that in the resource links.
Sure. Let me go back to the resource links page.
And I'm only looking at the file name, so I could be wrong on the file name.
So it's a long link, but it's number 18. So the
18.
teacher attendance stats,
Gotcha.
it's just a very, very long link.
Perfect. Thank you.
Katie, can I interrupt real quick? You said that we, with veteran teachers, we pay pretty well. I'm looking at the NEA website. Overall, Montana is 51st in the country, and that includes Washington, D.C. For average salary, we're $8,000 to $8,000 behind for first year teacher salary for every state that surrounds Montana. And then as far as overall average with veteran teachers included, we're 42nd in the union. So I don't understand how you say we rank pretty well with veteran staff receiving high paying salaries here. Where do you get that fact?
So I'm going off stats prepared that we've pulled from not only OPI numbers, but from the state here. So I put one of OPI's pay stats documents in here. This was presented at the committee. And I'm not saying that there's no need to look across the board, but I was pointing out that there is acute need to look at the first 5 years. So I'm not saying that we don't need to look at everything, but I did want to highlight that because that really does jump out. And I didn't want to go through every single stat today because I wanted us to get to discussion. But overall, it does show that there's an acute need in the first 5 years, but did not need to offend you by saying that it's great across the board. But there is some discrepancies, and it was talked about in the hearing that day with the NEA's numbers. But if you want to look in here, there's the Teach Act, and it goes into kind of, because this is put in the perspective of the Teach Act, but I will also put, there's a longer presentation that was put together by the legislative staff and by the Department of Labor, Montana Department of Labor. And I will put that in there as well. And it actually shows just kind of some of the discrepancies in the NEA's numbers and why there are discrepancies. And it comes down to that actually, like the Department of Labor here has a wider range of access to numbers than the NEA does.
Miles, I can answer that for you.
Mm-hmm.
The DLI report and the NEA report are comparing two totally different things. So the NEA report is an average of like starting teachers, just their salary, and DLI tracked 8,000 teachers and they used unemployment insurance. So they were adding in there any stipends that they might have or second jobs they might have, all of like their total pay. And the NEA, it's apples to oranges. So the NEA report is only looking at starting salary. And that NEA report does reflect if there's a high entry, but they're just going off of salary schedules, like just if you worked a normal teaching contract.
Thank you.
Yeah, anytime.
So, like I said, I just wanted to highlight that early teacher need and the turnover, but we can look at the big spectrum, just highlighting a specific point. So this is kind of like the summary document, like I said, that I kind of tried to pull out some of the big points that you guys made last time of some of the issues that you guys saw, but some of the solutions or path forwards that we see. So I know I talked a lot in the beginning, so I do want to turn it over to you guys to kind of reflect on what we talked about last time. Any thoughts since last time? And then how we kind of want to put these things into buckets as we see the biggest needs and how we want to challenge them.
I spent some time researching and I put some information into the shared folder on articles about why people are leaving the profession and what some of the states are doing. And then I found some great statistics and that kind of thing. And while you say compensation is, you know, maybe not the top necessarily all the time, but I believe for what you could see and what I put out there, compensation is a big deal. And that's probably one of the few things that the legislature can actually do something about, because it's school funding. I mean, when you talk about other factors like the quality of your employment experience and that kind of thing. I don't know that the legislature can do a whole lot about that, you know, short of providing more money to provide specialists and support to teachers. And so I think I think looking at how states are funding their education programs might make a difference in trying to figure out what they would actually be able to do.
And I guess I hit some buttons today. I didn't mean anything by that, but that was just a survey taken. So I just wanted to share that information, that looking at the workplace environment, and workplace environment is what you talked about with funding, of making sure the workload. So whether that be, you know, paraprofessionals for special educators or everything like that, all of that does tie back to funding, but not just saying, oh, we want more funding, but where you want the funding to go to. And that does play into like the workplace environment, the workload, the training, the advancements, all of it entangles together.
I would second
Agreed.
that compensation is incredibly important, and that advice from this group should be about compensation for recruitment and retention. Last time I shared that I'm a veteran teacher of 20 years, and I work 3 jobs to try to make ends meet as a single parent. Had a student teacher who is Montana State Student Teacher of the Year and wouldn't apply to our open position, went to Seattle and got paid $23,000 more. This time I'd like to share some other retention issues we've had recently. I asked other department leaders at Bozeman High School to share out. So here's some anecdotal stories, but an English department leader said, "We had a teacher in the English department who taught here successfully for 3 years. He gave significant time to school clubs and activities, and he had boundless energy. He wanted to buy a house and eventually start a family, but because houses and property are out of reach for young teachers here, he moved to Utah in 2023, where he can afford to buy a house. We lost an effective teacher and a mentor. My current teaching partner is only able to afford to live in Bozeman because he has 5 roommates. He and his girlfriend hope to get married and buy a house. He plans to stay for another year while his girlfriend finishes grad school, and then he'll probably move in search of more affordable community. I will mourn his absence because we had a great combo partnership. It'll be hard to find someone to replace him because we aren't getting as many qualified candidates to apply. In addition, this kind of turnover is difficult for a district to maintain momentum towards district goals, and students lack stability and consistency from year to year." Another says, "My previous combo partner, a brilliant teacher and graduate of Johns Hopkins, left in 2022 because he couldn't afford to buy a house with this teaching salary. He now works as a local economics firm and is making $30,000 more per year than he was as a 4th-year teacher." Another writes, "We lost an effective social studies teacher because they switched positions and started selling insurance, car insurance and home insurance, and made $20,000 more by making that move." And so these are all teachers in the first 5 years, and it's not because of working conditions. I'm biased with this. We have amazing working conditions, but again and again and again, we have stories about teachers who just can't make a livable salary here. Thank you.
Miles, just what you said, we have a teacher who's been teaching Spanish for 8 years. She took a leave of absence this coming year because she can't afford childcare because she has 2 children, and she said over something like 2/3 of her paycheck goes to childcare in the Helena area. And it's like, who could afford to live like that? I mean, it would be so impossible.
Mhm.
Now, you both represent probably a Class A school, AA, right? Well, I'm Class A at Lockwood. And so what's happening in our district is they will sign a contract saying, yes, they'll be in our district. And then something comes open in a larger school district, and then they leave. And so that's part of our issue that we're facing. So then we have some hard to fill positions. And then also to piggyback on the working conditions, I think that's a little vague. I would like to see more information. Are we talking leaky roofs, like the school buildings falling down? Are we talking combative students or an unsupportive administration? So I'd like to see more on that, because maybe there are some things that can be done. And I know there has been funding before to maybe help with safe schools. So I don't know if that kind of plays into it, but I agree with the pay. That's really where we need to focus our energies, especially for our smaller districts that are not high enough.
So I have two other anecdotal stories. As a science department leader, we tried to hire a physics teacher the last 2 years. And both years, we got a really high quality applicant from out of state. They were teaching AP physics in other districts. They had a lot of awards. They had really high test score ratings and all that kind of great stuff. They accepted the position, and then we got a call back each year around mid-July saying, "I'm sorry, I can't find any affordable housing. I have to turn down the position." And then they stayed in their home state. That leaves us high and dry, trying to find basically a warm body at the last minute before school starts, with only a few weeks left. And so the recruitment issue with compensation is a big thing for us too.
Wendy, I see your hand raised.
So I do apologize for not being here last session, but I have been in positions to do recruiting and compensation, class and comp work for companies in Silicon Valley, looking at computers and being a public entity trying to recruit away from companies like Apple and Google. And it is very, very hard, as you were saying, Miles, that, somebody coming in and, they sign a contract and then 2 weeks later get an offer from Google that's twice as much as what you can possibly afford to pay. When we look strategically at what we were doing, the same topic came up. It was overall compensation and work environment from those people who left during exit interviews. And so we had to look very carefully at what that meant, because a lot of times what it meant is what the actual hiring managers or the actual departments had as a culture for staff. If those conditions were not good, it meant that staff were going to go look. And if they looked, it was very easy in Silicon Valley to literally double your income. It was not a hard thing to do. And so I think there is a balance between it. And I think, Samantha, your comment of looking at what legislators can do, you're absolutely right. They can't come in, we have local control. They really can't come in and say, okay, this is how you need to be running your environments. But if we look at companies like Hewlett Packard or some of these other large Silicon Valley type tech companies, they don't just focus on income. They've got an environment that allows flexible hours. I mean, our local school districts have the ability to go from 10 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night, or go Saturday and not go Monday. There's a lot of flexibility that's afforded local entities that is not exercised, that actually does deal with compensation and desire. That doesn't mean compensation should be left where it is. I have several people in my family who are teachers across Montana, and it is a little bit amazing that we do this in terms of giving that pay. But I think the pay also indicates value. I wish it didn't, but there is a stigma attached to teachers who don't earn much, even if they've chosen to not go back and get their master's, because they want to be in the classroom and they want to pay attention to the teachers. And that stigma is also important to overcome. The respect that teachers get, I think, is very important and does carry an economic weight to it.
So specific to working conditions, our district tried to solve the budget crisis imposed by the legislature in a collaborative manner. We had a great kind of consensus process, but one of the outcomes was changing a bell schedule that causes teachers to teach more classes, take on more students, and lose prep time. And so this idea of it's not about compensation, it's about working conditions. Well, the state legislature's decisions are making our working conditions harder. And my property taxes doubled. My pay increase did not cover the property taxes that went up this year. So I'm going backwards in compensation. And that's not even covering inflation of like milk or bagels or local grocery store items. And so working harder for less is how what we're being asked of right now.
Kim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I talk to teachers across our state from Class C schools to B schools to A to double A, and I think that a lot of people are willing to do the extra. And maybe even if you don't have a great administration or you don't have a great bell schedule or whatever, but if you can work and go home and provide for your family, people can overlook a lot of that stuff. But more than anything, like I said, in my comments on Monday and Thursday or Wednesday, I don't even know what day it was, but teachers cannot afford to live and work in Montana on the salary that we're paying. And I mean, I did some research in Hamilton. A brand new teacher in Hamilton would make $41,000 a year. There were 5 rentals within a 20-mile radius, and none of them were less than $2,000. And so, you know, I know that the legislature is they don't like the fact that the NEA report says that we're 51st, but the first thing any teacher is going to look at when they apply for a job is the salary schedule that's on the website of the school. And if they can't, and the second thing they're going to look at is houses. Can I find a house to rent or to buy that's within that salary schedule? And it's I agree, Wendy, 100% with what you were saying, but if you can't even get over that hump to where you can actually afford to live someplace, you're not going to stay there, or you're not going to even come here. So it's, you know, as Miles and everybody else has said, it's absolutely compensation.
Michelle, I see your hand went up.
I think compensation is important, but I also want to talk about an aspect of working conditions that I think the legislator could address. And that is the safety of our special ed teachers. I know in our district of Bozeman, there is an increase of more violent special ed students. And so those teachers are often getting hurt in their classroom and then having to take leave to heal. And then they have essentially PTSD and do not want to come back. Because we should educate all students, there's no way to really relieve these special ed teachers of these troublesome students, because there's no other place for them to obtain their education, if that makes sense. We can't expel them. There's no place for them to go. So that's a working condition that I think with some legislative action could be taken care of. And then a second thing, I was just wondering, I was talking the other day, is there a room on the dial for the legislator to think about going away from number of hours required to meet every year? I know a lot of schools are moving toward a 4-day weekend in order to meet the hours that are a 4-day work week. In order to meet the hours, and that means we elongate our days, which means we have our students doing their activities longer, so on and so forth. And so if we didn't have that hour requirement, number of hours, then the 4-day work week would actually have some sort of impact and do what it's supposed to do.
Schools actually right now, that number of hours, depending on which students you're teaching, if you're using proficiency-based education model and Senate Bill 175, then you can override that. It's not about hours. School still gets A and B, even if the students are doing less hours than that time and teachers doing less instructional time.
So how does that work? Because I know that when the big scare this year for Bozeman high schools was that when we move to our block scheduling next fall, this coming fall, we're not going to have the proper number of contact hours, even though we're still doing 5 days a week, even though we still have to be there from 8 to 4. And so they had to do some kind of tricky arithmetic in order to meet that state standard of the number of hours.
So when you're doing instructional time that fits into the A and B count, it's instructional time. So if you are, let's say you have an internship class that you're managing and you've got 10 kids that are off site, those 10 kids can be receiving A and B funding for the school based on their work off site, and you're supervising that. So it may not be you're on site with every single one of the 10 at the 10 different sites, but you're responsible for what they're doing. Think also like a choir teacher who does, or a band teacher who does remote work with students, significant remote work with students, same kind of thing. It is not done frequently in Montana, but it is an allowable practice. It makes it a little bit feel sometimes like you have fewer students in your classroom, which you can, but it's based on the proficiency model. Doesn't matter where the student's learning, it's just about that they're learning.
No, we did that during COVID. And so I know that our administrators, Casey and Marilyn and Mike, must know about that. I just don't know why, in December of this year, they were just rightly so worried about the number of contact hours with our new schedule coming this fall. I don't know if we're moving back and forth in fluidity with proficiency or what it is, but yeah.
And I think a lot of times there's some things, and this is maybe something to think about the recruitment and retention. There were a lot of things that happened during COVID that felt different. You know, we're doing it because of COVID. But the reality is almost all, and I'm going to say almost all, just because I'm sure there's something out there that doesn't fit, could have been done in the first place. They could have been done prior to COVID. Bonuses could be given, stipends could be given, days of week could be given differently. All of that could have been done prior to COVID. And if we'd experimented as a state with those options prior to COVID, when COVID hit, it would have been a much smoother transition. Now, as we end COVID, there's a sense of, oh, we have to go back. We have to undo those things. And possibly part of the recruitment piece is to look at staff and say, so what did you like about what happened during COVID? I liked the bonuses. Okay, and I admit, a lot of the conversations I've had with teachers have been new teachers. They're just graduating from college, they're coming in, and I know the housing is a big issue, but for that group coming in, it often isn't. And one of the things I'll say to schools is, have you reached out to your community to find homes that are just vacant during the regular year? And actually in Hamilton, there are quite a few. People actually pay individuals who are well vetted, of course a teacher is, to live in their house because they've got multiple homes. So some of the things we did during COVID, because we just had to, we can actually continue them to go forward. And I will just wear the hat just for a second of, there are a lot of funds, 125 million ESSER funding that still hasn't been used, and it's got to get out the door by September 30th.
Well, Wendy, I will agree with you that there's things that came out of COVID that we could continue to do. But one thing about education that I found in the last 20 years is we don't seem to shift very quickly or easily. We are doing the same thing. I mean, we might be teaching things differently, but it seems like you look at a school board and administrators and whoever, and everybody's kind of like, well, we've always done it this way. And so it's very challenging to try to get anybody to think outside of the box and say, why don't we try this and see if it works? And so I do agree with you, because that's one of our discussions in my school is, you know, our Wednesdays when we could actually work with students more frequently. But unfortunately, you know, we're in class now, so we can't do that. But yeah, some great ideas came out of COVID. We just don't want to do any of those new things.
It's a hard conversation. And one conversation I had with a very small school district who was struggling with bringing in teachers from about an hour to an hour and a half away. They'd been successful for a couple of years, but then kind of lost them about every 2 years, and they're kind of a revolving mode. And I said, well, have you ever thought about using your ESSER funding to build on, because they have a small footprint for the school, building a apartment above the school? And they said, well, you can't do that. I said, well, why not? And so we had a whole discussion around the why nots. And I think sometimes those discussions as teachers and community members, you've got a lot of great ideas that can be brought forward both to the legislators, but also locally at the school board. I mean, I attend our local school board meetings all the time, and there's hardly ever anybody even present. And yet you go somewhere in a grocery store and somebody will be saying, why aren't the schools doing, right? And it is hard to convince people for change. Change is very, very hard. And we just came off of COVID that was very challenging. But there are some really good ideas, and there's some reasons to change.
And that's one thing we can think about too, is and we should start getting into that, some of the bigger picture things of how we would like to see teacher salary increase and how, but also like pilot programs. So if there's creative things that, it's like a school may want to do it, but maybe not the funding's not there. Legislatures are usually very open to pilot programs because it's a smaller, financial burden at first, but then you get to see the results. And if it's working really well and it's worth the financial investment, then it makes sense to keep going forward. But if there's pilot programs you guys can think of, whether it be for housing or anything like that, those are all ideas that we could put forward. It can be like the big overhaul, but pilot programs are always good ways to try creative ideas that maybe people can be hesitant about.
So we did use a pilot program with the IT staff by paying their down payment on a house. And you can imagine in the San Francisco Bay Area how expensive that is. But we got 2 private foundations to help support that effort. And that was one of the pilots we ran to bring, and frankly, well, I don't know about most, but many communities throughout Montana have foundational staff in their communities, and they might be very willing. That's an investment in the community. And so something in terms of maybe a match, the legislators pay half, foundation pays half, and, teacher comes in and the down payments get put on the house with a 5-year. I'm thinking Habitat for Humanity does some of that. I don't know how they structure it, but.
Yeah, exactly. Or it might be hard to do that, something like that statewide, but something like that done as a pilot program to see how a community can get that off the ground. It can be a great example for other communities to be creative, or the state to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
There were some interesting things that they're doing in Missouri. I put it in our Google folder, but they have a program called Career Ladder. And it provides like stipends for teachers who perform extra duties or who choose to contact parents or plan after school or whatever. They have behavioral interventionists, which I can't remember who was saying something about special education, but we have the same problem, not just necessarily with our special educators, but we have a number of problems with students and their anger and the physicalness of some of their release of anger. And so I know we had the grant for instructional coaches, but I believe that ended this year. School-based therapists, school counselors, of course, we have counselors already in place. They even have a pre-K program that helps save teachers about $1,200 a month in their daycare or for their daycare. So, I know we were talking about looking at some ideas, and I think that also, some of that would also help with the whole work environment. But it still comes down to money. Where do you get the money when, for example, my district, we lost 52 non-tenured teachers this year, we're being told that our caseloads or our class loads, it's going to be like the Hunger Games. So everybody will know how many students you're teaching. And if you're not teaching the minimum number of students, then the whole district and every, you know, and it's like, oh my God, you know, how that really sets somebody up for really wanting to do their best when it's being referred to as something like the Hunger Games. And so, you know, maybe that it still comes we got to get the money somewhere to improve some of these situations. And Helena, and I think in most places across the state, they weren't very successful at passing any levies. You know, so I don't know. I think we have to do something to figure out what happened with those extra mills. Where did they go and why did we get them? Because they didn't go to education. And how can we do some switching so that schools can put some of that stuff in place to keep teachers safe and to not make a Hunger Games situation for the number of students you teach every day.
Kim, go ahead.
It seems that
Oh.
one of the ideas of our legislature was to provide easier alternative licensure. I'm not sure if Senate Bill 373 has come across your desk at your schools, but without giving too many details about an interview committee, we had an applicant who had no secondary science background coursework, no student teaching, just minimal number of observation hours of a classroom, maybe some elementary education courses applying to a high school science position. And we were kind of shocked by the fact that, like, what makes you think you're qualified for this position? And they cited Senate Bill 373 says that I can do this. It seems that Senate Bill 373 is just going to allow anybody with a college degree to apply for a teaching position. And when we're getting 1 to 2 applicants, when in a district we used to get 150 applicants for a position, it seems like it's just going to be setting people up for a challenge. Catherine asked earlier about, like, how do we do retention in the first 5 years with this 30% turnover? That's not a proper solution. Let's just let people into the classroom that have no education, pedagogy, or training. The Senate Bill 373 is pretty loose in its terms. I know it says that they should have like a mentorship. I worked as a mentor and a master teacher in Colorado. Colorado had an alternative licensure program that had a very defined mentorship process. When I was a first-year teacher in Colorado, I had a mentor observing my classroom in a non-evaluative way weekly and got feedback. That was a paid stipend for a full-time mentor to observe new teachers. That's not what our schools that I know of have as far as mentors. I mean, we have a so-called mentor for a new hire in our building, but it's more of like when they ask a question like, how do I figure out how to print off the copy machine? Where do I get my copy code? Or my computer's not working, who do I contact? There is no formal mentor, master teacher type progress in the district that I work at. We would be very ill-equipped to hire alternative licensure teachers on a provisional basis through Senate Bill 373. I know that it may open doors for somebody who might be super qualified. Maybe they're an engineer or they were working as a college professor and they want to circumvent student teaching. But I think the first applicant we saw that cited this bill, it was not setting them up for success. So I don't know that the legislature is on the right path to try to solve the teaching crisis in Montana by just saying anybody with a college degree can step into a classroom without any background in that coursework. That's my 2 cents.
Kim, do you want to go and then Lisa?
Yeah, and I know this has been brought up at several of the interim meetings that I have attended where they are talking about that idea of a community school where there are, you know, like you have a medical clinic on campus and you have a food bank on campus and you have like after school programs on campus and things like that. And it seems to me like something like that might help. I don't think that's the solution, but it seems to me if you don't have to take your kids across town to go to the doctor, or if you don't have to go all the way across town to go to the doctor, maybe it might be helpful. And we know that having those food bank services is helpful for our students because there's so many students in this day and age that are using those. But I feel like, unfortunately, that, you know, in talking about that community school model, there's again no funding for it. But I also think that it can't just be for our students. Like our teachers need some of those resources where you don't have to, you know, take the day off to go here, there, and everywhere for things like that. And so again, it's a funding issue where they're going to have to give some money to help start those things. But again, trying to get in some doctors and mental health professionals and daycare, things like that. But, and you know, I don't know that it's really awesome, or I mean, it seems great, but it's a funding issue for that as well.
Lisa?
So we, in Kalispell School District, we have a health clinic, which it has shown that it is cheaper than using the local medical businesses. And it does help with the drop-in visits, the short notice visits. And we have the food bank for families. It could be not just the students, but the parents. And we have a Heart Locker where the community drops off, instead of dropping stuff off of Goodwill, they drop it off at this or one of the older school district buildings, and they allow kids and families to come and grab whatever they need, whether it's school supplies or clothing or winter gear or backpacks. And so that has really helped our community. And listening to everyone in my school district, like last year, my contract, my insurance went up, so it ate my increase in pay. So I really didn't make a significant amount of increase in my pay from last year. This year is the same issue. And my district, we're in a negotiation session going into this next year with our past existing contract from this past school year. And so I'm not sure where we're headed. And that's kind of uneasy of knowing where we will be financially, you know, as a teacher. And again, they're trying to do the same thing what Miles at your district has done, which is have us teach more class periods, lose a prep or lose our duty period. And but there's no talk about, well, how many, if you increase our instructional time with adding another class period, will that increase our student enrollment in each class period, or will it reduce it? I work at the 9th grade level. We have 30 kids in a classroom. If they allow us to teach another class period, would that mean we will have another class with 28 and 30 kids? Just, you know, reduce, and with that, 30 teachers will lose their jobs. And so it looks like we would be having more students in a classroom. And there was one more thing I wanted to share. Talking about the teacher residency, we had a student, a college graduate, taking a last minute job, and she has been teaching for 2 years where they're letting her go. And because of the one thing, these being hired just because you have a college degree, she did not have the teacher training of classroom management. And which was unfair to her. So that they're letting her go because of classroom management, and she has not, been fully trained as a teacher in that area. So that's an area of a gray area of where they're put in a position and required to do everything that we have been trained to do and not have that full training when they step into their classroom.
I wanted to piggyback off of what Lisa said in terms of that, you get an increase. And I remember this happening to me very early on. I got something like a $5 increase. And then because everything got taken out in other ways, I ended up with taking home less. And I thought, this is crazy. And fortunately, our HR department at the time had an amazing financial management component, and you could go in and say, what's wrong with this picture? And one of the things we were able to do is defer the increase. And if you deferred the increase because of where your economics were at the time, because maybe you had kids, you were trying to juggle scholarships, there were a number of different reasons, maybe your husband got a raise or something. When you deferred it, it didn't mean you lost it. You just didn't necessarily get it that year. And that made planning for those financial things much better than simply this sort of rubber band effect. You're getting something, but oh no, you're not. And I think there could be, that might be something to consider is there a way to look at, because of course every school district's paying differently, but is there a way to manage those increases such that staff do in fact get the increase? So I'm thinking of a friend of mine who was pregnant. She's leaving for 3 months. If that increase had been given to her at the end of her contract for her to use as she's on maternity leave, she would have been thrilled, rather than having it tacked on to her individual salary, which then impacted how much she was actually getting.
But
Okay.
when if your insurance goes out and like mine, 12%, and I got a 1% increase, you can put that 1% wherever you want. I'm still going to have 12% less, or my insurance is going to cost me 12% more. So that amount is still going to reduce my paycheck, where inflation and everything else has continued to go up. And so I'm even worse off with or without that 1%. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. I teach personal finance, but I'm into economics, but I mean, the math just it's not there.
We
Catherine?
did also a cafeteria plan, and I don't know across the state of Montana how many teachers are married versus not, but in the cafeteria approach, we frequently had, and in Hamilton, because we've got these big players like GSK or National Institute of Health, you might have one spouse having wonderful medical benefits, but you have the other spouse in a teaching having to pay for medical, and you can drop that medical. If you could apply it to something else, that would be great. And that is what we did. We allowed, it was just cafeteria. You had X amount of money. You could allocate it the way you wanted.
And then speaking of inflation, to go like big picture again. So obviously there is like a cap on the inflation here. It's a legislative cap. Many states do tie to inflation in some way, but not real inflation. They also have caps. So they have inflation metrics, but then a cap. So Massachusetts, for instance, 4.5% cap, higher than ours. They're having the same conversations we're having right now with inflation. There's some states that don't tie to inflation at all. But when we're looking at inflation and how you guys would like to see that configured into budget talks, how do you see that?
How many teachers are there in Montana in order to get a sense of how far in the hole we are as like 51st in the states?
Like 10,000. That's not including paraprofessionals, or that's in classroom teachers, a little over 10,000. And then also thinking about big picture too, I mentioned Iowa. They have a base pay across the state. Here in Montana, it's much more local control. Is a base pay across the state something that you guys like back? Or another proposal that was talked about in the committees, and I'm sure Kim can jump in and expand upon it more. Like Lance Melton, for instance, has a proposal out there, and it is a little bit, it's large, so I'm going to do my best to summarize it in 2 sentences. But it's basically tying more money to the quality educators and less focus on the A and B. It's much more complicated than that, but, and Kim's shaking her head, so I think I did a good job of summarizing in 2 sentences. But those are some of the things that are out there of looking at adjustments of how to increase teacher pay. So how do you guys feel about those things?
It would also change the tax system, where you wouldn't have individual districts going out for levies. It would be like a countywide thing. And I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work, but it was less of an emphasis on A and B and more of an emphasis on quality educators. So they would up that educator pay for that quality educator payment. And just my 2 cents, we need to get rid of the cap that we have on inflation. And I know that that bill was brought forth at the last session and it got voted down. So,
Excuse me.
I think just to bring us up to equitable amount of base pay to all of the states that border Montana, the legislature should at least carve out 100 million of the $760 million surplus that they have currently, put towards education, and that's the minimum, just to bring us up to North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, Wyoming's far ahead of us.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Not just that for salaries, but since an overwhelming majority of our AA schools are in deficit, they need to do more for school funding in general. Salaries, yes. But when those ESSER funds are gone, that was kind of nice to have that extra money to start some special projects who have done some really great things in schools. There's just none to be had because of the deficit. And then I'd like to also say, I would really like to see, out of respect for our occupation, I would like to see the legislature, and they won't, but I'd like them to reconsider again how you can become a teacher. Just a 4-year degree does not make you a well-versed individual for classroom management or for explaining how things happen. So to circumvent an education degree to get someone in the classroom really is a slap in the face. It's incredibly disrespectful to our profession.
I'm a parent of 2 daughters, and that really freaks me out, to be honest. And so it's not just, a bias of being an educator, but also a parent.
I completely agree with you guys. It's mind-boggling to me to think that a person can just come in and have a teaching job and know nothing about working with kids, or I mean, they might know the content, but there's a lot more to being a teacher than knowing your content. So I would hope that we could somehow, at least if that's what they want in place, they need to have a lot more requirements as far as a teacher education program goes. But going back to your initial question a minute ago about inflation, I do think that we need to have the legislature or the school funding picture does need to have a better metric for inflation. Hopefully things will continue to go down, but that's not going to happen overnight. And will probably face this again and again. And so sticking to whatever it is it what, 3% or something weird, crazy like that? I think we do need to recommend that they have some kind of formula that is more in line with what inflation really looks like, because it's not just our pay, but like somebody was just saying, it's also paying the utility bills and everything else. And when all of those costs are so much higher, you can't pay teachers, you can't pay for programs and equipment that you need, because you're paying the water bill and the electric bill and that kind of thing that's gone up 12-15%, and the funding hasn't matched that, and that doesn't make any sense.
I think the hard thing that I hear from people in the community about all the levies not passing, whether it's inflation or not, there's sort of the concept of, we agree that teachers should be paid more because they're so abysmally paid, period. Somebody locally said, I think it was at Stevensville, that the bus driver earned more than the teachers to start with, which is just, crazy. But at the same time, teachers as a profession, when you look at how are the kids doing, so the product of that teaching is going down. Now, that's not necessarily the fault of the teachers, it's a system. And so to look at recruitment and retention in an isolated format for only teachers, I think takes away from the bigger picture, which is the whole system needs to be funded differently, not just teachers, but the whole half of ESSER, I think, and that is probably too high, but a large portion of it went to deferred maintenance. I mean, there were things that really had to be done. You got the third floor at 90 degrees and you got the bottom floor at 60 degrees. It doesn't work. And I 100% agree with the statement. I've listened to many teachers make comments about the fact that while in a program, a teaching program, they learn the content knowledge. They know history, they know math. But when they came to the classroom, it was appalling. Even if they'd done wonderful student teaching, the things that were allowed to occur were just way out of their realm of understanding of how to deal with. And so you have that happen 1 or 2 years, and many people who are very capable of going somewhere else do in fact leave. It's both. And that's behavioral issues in the classroom, whether it's special ed or regular classrooms. It's pretty extreme.
And I had the special ed group right before you guys. So that was something that we discussed a lot about, was even outside of the, IEP special education realm, the behavioral issues have been extreme, especially post-COVID. And that, I mean, they all tie together. I know it ties back into how much the teachers get paid. It ties back into the working environment. It all ties together. So it's been an hour, and I know we've discussed a lot, and I hear a lot of frustrations on here, and I understand that, but keep your head up. Like I said, a lot of times, things don't change overnight, but having these discussions within our group and then expanding that outside is really important to keep the ball rolling, and to make sure that changes occur either this session or sessions in the future. Check out the share drive. There's a number of resources in there. And then the summary page. What I will be doing based on our previous discussion in this one is preparing another document with some, I think I have a relatively good sense of where you guys are heading, but I'm going to put together another document for you guys to review at our next meeting, to prepare for the final document. But in the meantime, I know there was a couple things mentioned, but is there any information or stats I can try to track down, or anything you would like to know more about or put into the share drive going forward?
A case for change, if it's not in there, and I probably need some kind of mentorship in how to navigate this, but the documentation on a case for change that was done the last 2 years, that might be good to have in here.
You are right, Wendy, and I meant to put it in there, and I don't think I put it into our groups, but you are right, and I will make sure that is in there later today.
I don't know if this applies, but with the conversations tonight, I've been kind of trying to wonder and understand the allocation of funding. Like my district's, the admin office says that at the district level, there's certain money that they have freedom to spend in certain areas, but teacher salary is 95% already taken up. And so could money be allocated in different, could the formulas be changed? Or can we review where the allocation occurs within funding to see, if there's any suggestions to be made of increasing the funding that is applied to teacher salaries?
That is something that's been mentioned in other groups. I know there's not a lot of schools right now saying that they're in a great financial position, but I have talked to superintendents and principals who have been like, there's some years when they're in better financial shape where they wish they had an ability to possibly transfer funds between different funds, whether it's building maintenance fund or technology fund. So that has something been brought up if there's some levels of flexibility. So when certain needs arise, they're able to make those changes. So that is something that has been brought up by other superintendents.
Katie, do you have Pat McCracken's one pager in that folder? Do you know what I'm talking
Which
about?
one pager? He's made many one.
I know he's famous for those, but it's the one that has it's the colorful one that explains all the different parts of school funding. Do you know which one I'm talking? Maybe I'll just link it. I'll find it
I
and I'll
think
link
so.
it.
I know I have a number of his documents. I think I know what you're talking about, so I should be able to put that in there.
Yeah.
I know there's a
I
video.
I did put some of the funding documents
Yeah.
in some of the other groups. I tried to have specific groups, but I do remember seeing that, and I'll try to put that in there as well.
Lisa,
I know there's the OPI. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's some funds that you can move around and they have, we don't have the use it or lose it anymore. I think they can put it into something called an interlocal agreement if there's any leftovers, which there rarely is, but they're pretty specific about what the funds have to be used for. So,
well, you have to kind of you have to kind of be careful with levied funds, and most all those are levied funds. When you guys are talking about moving money from funds to funds, and I get it, you wish you had, we had a little bit of a surplus in our transportation fund. Well, we'll just pay teachers out of there. Well, unless you're doing bus duty, you can't be paid out of there. Building reserve is very sticky. You can't just move money around. An allocation power would help, but what you're doing is then the next year you can't go and ask your taxpayers for more levy to fill that deficit back up. So when you're looking at, wish we could pay more out of this, it comes down to teachers can really only ever be paid out of the general fund. And so that's kind of where that sticky point becomes super hard when we're looking at funding and sources. And I agree, the biggest portion of all of this is health insurance, and salaries take up the most of your general fund. I mean, we're out in Eastern Montana and we're at 116% of our general fund just to pay people. And that's everybody, not just teachers, but it's everybody. And we're very fortunate to have oil and gas, but not everybody has that. And where the legislature needs to figure something out to help ease that burden, where, health insurance here is probably, I would say, about 15 to 20%. So of all those costs, and that's where that big push is going to be to get that state fund going. And it's not going to help. It's going to be winners for some and losers for others. And that new funding formula is winners for some and losers for other school districts too, because they're wanting a mandatory mill levy in your base and your over base. And it's not a one size fits all. And we always talk about funding being tied to kids, and you have your ups and your downs of kids. Well, you have your ups and your downs of educators too, and you can't fill those positions. So what happens if your funding is highly tied to educators, and you had the instance of the Helenas and they had to let them go? Maybe they wouldn't, but what if, and then your funding goes down because of that too. So I don't know. I think it's a slippery slope. I just think the legislature needs to take that cap off and let us either locally do what we need to do to survive, but it's also that catch-22. It's going to be that your taxes are going to go up. So we all want raises, but our taxes are going to go up to have to self-sustain that too. So that's that catch-22 is the state's not going to fund it. They're going to turn around and say, that's fine. You have more local control, because we've seen that over the last few sessions. More local control means more local taxes. So I don't know, but I think the state needs to, like, we shouldn't have such a small cap on our general fund budget, because that's where everybody's getting paid from. It's scary.
Well, I know one of the ideas that was brought up in another group, and it was interesting, was it was almost a combination of the quality teacher and the A and B, but basically it's based on how many teachers you need to provide services for the amount of students you have. So even if you do lose like 3 students from a small grade, and it's like you still have to provide the 5th grade class, right? Even if you lost 3 students, you don't have to worry about losing the A and B, because it's based on the teachers you need to provide the services in that school. It was an interesting combination of those two. I know it's a lot more complicated. Everything is a lot more complicated than how we state it, because like Jen just said, if you talk about being able to transfer funds, there's a lot of spider webs that come along with it of why you're not allowed to transfer and what you are allowed to do. So, but it's interesting ideas, and even if the flexibility in funds is a little bit complicated, sometimes there's just small tweaks you can make around where small things are be able to be transferred. And it's not as hairy as she was saying. So all good ideas, all good things to talk about, and talk about the pros and cons of ideas. Like I said, I'm going to prepare another kind of summary document, and hopefully start narrowing down things that you guys feel are good proposals or avenues to go down. Everything doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. Some things can be, some things can't be, but just as we start to formulate ideas that we want to put forward and why we want to put them forward, we're going to start cleaning up the document. I'm going to try to put things into categories. Teacher pay retention is something that is tied through all the groups. So you guys are like the hottest topic. Every single group talks about teacher retention and pay. So obviously it's very important, and we know the legislature's talking about it. So we just want to make sure we put out ideas there and we're all positive and trying to go in the right direction. But thank you everyone for taking time out of your very busy schedules to listen to me talk for a very long time. But I appreciate all your ideas. I really enjoyed this discussion. I'm available if you have any questions, just shoot me an email, check out the share drive. Other than that, if anyone has any final thoughts, go enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.